I discovered my family's secret on the exact day my best friend fired me. She said I didn't understand the value of history. How ironic, considering my family owned this city's history. As I walked out of Stratus & Co., in complete humiliation, clutching the box of my belongings. I had no idea that tucked away in my father's old papers was a deed that would change everything. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing. My name is Emily Hartman. And until 3 hours ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was. 35 years old, 10 years of blood, sweat, and late nights poured into Stratus & Co., the city's most prestigious PR firm. I was the one they called when a client's reputation hung by a thread. I was the one who crafted campaigns that didn't just sell products, they sold dreams, aspirations, entire lifestyles. Rachel Green and I had been more than colleagues. We'd been sisters in arms. We started as junior associates the same week, sharing cheap takeout during all-nighters and celebrating each other's victories like they were our own. She was the creative visionary. I was the strategic executor. The perfect partnership. Everyone said. We even joked about opening our own firm someday. About how we'd run things differently than the old boys club that still dominated our industry. I should have seen the signs. The way she started taking credit for collaborative ideas in meetings. How she'd schedule client calls when I was out, then casually mentioned she'd handled everything upon my return. The subtle undermining disguised as helpful suggestions. But trust makes you blind. And I trusted Rachel with everything. My career, my reputation, my future. The Meridian Hotel's account was supposed to be our crown jewel. A year-long campaign worth $3 million. The kind of contract that could secure both our careers for the next decade. We'd worked on the pitch together for months, but I'd been the one burning the midnight oil, crafting every detail of the media strategy, building relationships with their executives, ensuring every element was flawless. The conference room was packed that morning. Meridian's entire executive team, our senior partners, and half the office crowded around the mahogany table. I was presenting the final phase of our rollout when Rachel's voice cut through my explanation like a blade. I need to stop you right there, Emily. Her tone was apologetic, but her eyes held something I'd never seen before, calculation. I've been trying to find a way to bring this up privately, but given where we are in the presentation, I think everyone needs to know about the compliance issue. The room fell silent. Compliance issue? My heart started hammering against my ribs. What compliance issue? I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Rachel slid a folder across the table with practiced precision. The demographic data you've been using for the past 6 months? It's from an unlicensed third-party vendor. I discovered it last week when I was double-checking our sources for the Meridian team. I've been trying to figure out how to handle this delicately. But we can't present falsified research to our clients. The words hit me like a physical blow. Every eye in the room turned to me, and I could see the exact moment their confidence cracked. Meridian's marketing director was already reaching for her phone. Our senior partner, Jonathan Stratus himself, was studying the documents with the expression of a man watching his reputation crumble. That's impossible, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I vetted every source personally. I have the licensing agreements. These licensing agreements, Rachel produced another folder, this one thick with official-looking documents. I had our legal team review them. They're expired. Emily. They've been expired for 8 months. The room erupted in hushed conversations. Meridian's executives were gathering their materials, their faces grim. I watched 10 years of my career dissolve in real time, powerless to stop it. I'm sorry, I whispered to the room. To Rachel. To myself. I don't understand how this happened. Rachel's hand found my shoulder. A gesture that would have seemed supportive to anyone watching. But I felt her fingers tighten. Heard the satisfaction barely concealed in her voice when she said, "These things happen, we'll figure this out." But we wouldn't figure it out. Within an hour, I was clearing out my desk while the entire office watched. 10 years of awards, commendations, and client testimonials packed into a cardboard box. 10 years of building something, only to watch it crumble because of documents I'd never seen before in my life. As I walked toward the elevator for the last time, Rachel appeared beside me. "I'm really sorry it had to happen this way," she said quietly. "But sometimes people just don't understand the value of doing things the right way, of respecting history and proper procedures." The elevator doors closed on her sympathetic smile, and I realized I was completely alone. 3 days of wallowing in my apartment had left me with nothing but empty wine bottles and a growing sense of desperation. I couldn't bear another minute of staring at the walls. So I drove to my childhood home, the modest 2-story house where my parents had raised me before they passed 5 years ago. I'd been putting off sorting through Dad's study, but now I needed something, anything, to distract me from the wreckage of my career. The study still smelled like his pipe tobacco and old leather. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through windows that hadn't been opened in months. I started with the desk drawers, working methodically through decades of accumulated papers, tax returns, insurance policies, family photos that made my chest tight with grief. It was in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet that I found the folder labeled Property Holdings Confidential. My father, Robert Hartman, had been a quiet man who worked as a city planner for 30 years. The idea that he had property holdings seemed absurd. We'd lived paycheck to paycheck, clipping coupons and shopping sales. What property could he possibly have owned? My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were deeds, contracts, and notarized documents dating back decades. But it was the letterhead that made my breath catch. Hartman Family Trust, established 1879. The papers were thick, expensive, the kind that whispered of old money and older secrets. I spread the documents across Dad's desk, my pulse quickening with each page. Property after property, all held under shell companies and trust arrangements that traced back to my great-great-grandfather. Small buildings, mostly, scattered throughout Brookville's historic district. But one name kept appearing, over and over: Greenwood Books. Greenwood Books, I knew that store. Everyone in Brookville did. It was the city's oldest bookstore, a narrow 3-story building squeezed between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store on Main Street. I'd browsed there as a child, running my fingers along the spines of first editions while Dad pretended to read the newspaper in the corner armchair. The owner was a quiet elderly man who seemed to know every book in his cramped, wonderful shop. According to the documents in front of me, my family had owned Greenwood Books since 1879. Not just owned it, we'd been its silent guardians for 5 generations, protecting it through economic downturns, urban development pressures, and the retail apocalypse that had claimed so many independent bookstores. The current arrangement showed ownership held by Meridian Holdings, LLC, but the trust documents revealed the truth. Meridian Holdings was just another shell, another layer of protection. But protection from what? I found my answer in a letter dated just 6 months before Dad's death. His handwriting was shakier than I remembered, but his words were clear. "Emily, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me and it's time for you to know the truth. Greenwood isn't just a bookstore, it's the keystone property that protects the entire historic district. Without it, developers would have a clear path to demolish everything that makes Brookville special. I've kept this secret to protect you, to protect the store, and to protect our community. But now the choice is yours. Guard it well." Dad! I sank into his old leather chair, the weight of revelation settling over me like a heavy blanket. All those years of struggling financially, of Dad taking on extra consulting work, of Mom mending clothes instead of buying new ones, and we'd been sitting on a gold mine. More than that, we'd been the secret guardians of the city's soul. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Saw the news about Stratus. Drinks to commiserate. Michael Torres, Brookville Gazette. Michael had been covering the local business beat for years, and he'd written several pieces about my work at Stratus. Under normal circumstances, I'd have declined. But these weren't normal circumstances. I texted back, "Rain check. But I might have a story for you soon." Because sitting there in my father's study, surrounded by 5 generations of family secrets, I realized that Rachel's parting words had been more prophetic than she knew. She'd said I didn't understand the value of history. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I carefully gathered the documents, my mind already racing with possibilities. I had work to do. And for the first time in 3 days, I felt something other than despair. I felt purpose. And beneath that, stirring like a sleeping dragon, I felt the first whispers of something darker. Revenge. The next morning, I did what any good PR professional would do when seeking intelligence. I called in favors. Sarah Martinez from the Business Licensing Office owed me for keeping her name out of a messy municipal scandal 2 years ago. Within an hour, she'd sent me a digital copy of every business registration filed in Brookville over the past 6 months. I sat in my kitchen with my laptop and a pot of coffee, methodically searching through the files, corporate registrations, partnership agreements, DBA filings, and there it was. Caro Holdings, LLC, incorporated 3 months ago. Primary business, real estate development, and urban renewal. Principal address, a prestigious downtown office building. But it was the list of officers that made my blood run cold. President, Marcus Caro. Vice President of Community Relations, Rachel Green. My hands shook as I scrolled through the filing documents. Rachel had been planning this for months, maybe longer. While I'd been trusting her with my career, she'd been building her exit strategy. The compliance violation, the expired licenses, it had all been orchestrated to clear me out of the way. I needed to see this for myself. I drove downtown to Caro Holdings' listed address, a gleaming glass tower that housed some of the city's most powerful firms. The directory in the lobby showed Caro Holdings on the 14th floor, right next to a law firm specializing in municipal development. From the coffee shop across the street, I had a perfect view of the building's entrance. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 a.m., Rachel emerged from the elevator, looking nothing like the stressed colleague who'd expressed such concern for my situation just 4 days ago. She was polished, confident, carrying herself with the authority of someone who'd just stepped into their destiny. She met a tall man in an expensive suit, Marcus Caro, I assumed, and they walked together toward the parking garage. I followed at a distance, my heart hammering as they climbed into a black BMW and headed toward the historic district. They parked outside Greenwood Books. I watched from the coffee shop next door as Rachel and Caro stood on the sidewalk, gesturing at the bookstore and the surrounding buildings. Rachel was animated, pointing out features of the architecture, the foot traffic patterns, the proximity to the new transit line. Caro was taking notes, nodding, occasionally photographing the building with his phone. They were measuring it for demolition. I ordered another coffee and strained to hear their conversation through the window. Fragments drifted through the morning air. Entire block has development potential. Zoning variances shouldn't be a problem. Historic preservation is just a matter of proper paperwork. Then I heard Rachel's voice clearly. The bookstore owner is elderly, probably eager to sell, and even if he's not, the building's been losing money for years. A generous offer plus some pressure from the city about code violations should do the trick. Caro laughed. I like your style, Green. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need for the community relations position. Community relations. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Rachel was positioning herself as the bridge between Caro Holdings and the community she was helping to destroy. They spent another 20 minutes walking the block, with Rachel pointing out each building like a general surveying a battlefield. The vintage clothing store, the coffee shop, the small art gallery. All of it was apparently in Caro's crosshairs. But Greenwood Books was the centerpiece, the property that would give them control over the entire historic district. After they left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching people come and go from Greenwood Books. A young mother with twin toddlers browsed the children's section. An elderly man spent 45 minutes examining a first edition of something I couldn't identify. A group of college students sprawled on the floor in the poetry section, sharing a worn copy of Neruda. These people had no idea their sanctuary was being measured for destruction. They trusted that someone, somewhere, was protecting the places that mattered to them. They trusted that the system worked, that community had value, that history couldn't simply be bulldozed for profit. I'd trusted the system once, too. I'd trusted that hard work and integrity would be rewarded, that friendship meant something, that the world operated on principles of fairness and decency. Rachel had taught me better. I pulled out my phone and called Michael Torres at the Gazette. That story I mentioned, I'm ready to talk. But I need to do some research first. Can you give me a week? What kind of story are we talking about? Emily. I watched a teenage girl emerge from Greenwood Books with a stack of paperbacks, her face glowing with the particular joy that comes from finding exactly the right book at exactly the right moment. The kind that changes everything, I said. The next morning, I stood outside Greenwood Books at 8:55 a.m., waiting for it to open. The morning light caught the gold lettering on the window. Greenwood Books, Est, 1879, purveyors of fine literature. My great-great-grandfather's business, passed down through 5 generations of careful stewardship. A tall, thin man with silver hair unlocked the door from inside. He moved with the deliberate pace of someone who'd performed this ritual thousands of times. When he saw me waiting, he smiled and opened the door with a small bow. "You're early today," he said warmly. "I'm Walter Greenwood." "Well, not really Greenwood, that's just what everyone calls me. I've been managing this place for 37 years. "I'm Emily," I said, stepping into the familiar maze of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "Emily Hartman." Walter's face changed subtly, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Hartman," he repeated carefully. "Would you be Robert's daughter?" "You knew my father?" "Oh, my dear." Walter's voice was soft with something like relief. "I've been wondering when you'd come. Your father visited every month, right up until—" He paused, then continued gently. "He was very proud of you. You know, always talking about his daughter, the PR executive, how you were making such a difference in the world." The weight of revelation settled over me again. Dad had been here, in this store, every month for 37 years. All those Saturday afternoons when he'd said he was going to run errands, he'd been checking on our family's legacy. "Walter," I said, "I need to ask you something important. Have you had any visitors recently? Anyone asking about buying the building?" His expression darkened. "3 times in the past month. A man named Caro and a woman, professional types, very polished. They keep talking about maximizing the property's potential and bringing the neighborhood into the 21st century. He shook his head. "They don't understand what this place means to people." "What did you tell them?" "The same thing I tell everyone who wants to buy us out. The owner isn't interested in selling. Though I have to admit, they're persistent. The woman, Green, I think her name was, she seemed to know an awful lot about our business records. Made some comments about declining sales and rising maintenance costs that were uncomfortably accurate. Rachel. She'd been fishing for information, probably preparing her pitch to Caro about how easy it would be to pressure us into selling. If only she knew who she was really dealing with. "Walter, I need to tell you something. My family owns this building. We've owned it since 1879. Walter's eyes widened, then filled with something like wonder. "Your family? You're the guardians." "The guardians?" "That's what your father called it. He said the Hartman family were the guardians of Brookville's soul." Walter gestured around the store. "This building, this business, it's not just a bookstore, it's the heart of the historic district. Without it, everything else would fall to the developers." He led me to the back office, a cramped space filled with accounting ledgers and inventory lists. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a thick folder labeled Hartman Family Trust, Confidential. "Your father updated this every year," Walter explained. "Financial records, maintenance schedules, legal documents. He said someday someone from the family would need to know everything." I opened the folder, my hands trembling. Inside were detailed reports on every aspect of the store's operation. But also something more. a comprehensive analysis of the historic district's vulnerability to development. Dad had been tracking property sales, zoning changes, and municipal policies for decades. He'd seen the threat coming long before Caro Holdings existed. "Walter," I said, "I need your help. Those people who've been coming around, they're not just random developers. They're part of a larger plan to demolish this entire block. And I think I know how to stop them." Walter's face lit up with the kind of fierce determination I'd only seen in old war movies. "What do you need?" "First, I need to understand exactly how much influence this building has over the rest of the block. Then, I need to contact someone at the Heritage Brookville Foundation. And Walter?" I met his eyes. "I need you to keep this conversation between us. Can you do that?" "Miss Hartman," Walter said solemnly, "I've been keeping your family's secrets for 37 years. I'm not about to stop now." As I left the store an hour later, my arms full of documents and my head spinning with possibilities, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of a perfectly crafted strategy coming together. Rachel had taught me that trust was a weakness, that friendship was just another tool for manipulation. She was about to learn that I was a very fast student. The transfer of ownership took exactly 48 hours. My lawyer, David Kim, had worked with my father on the trust documents for years, though he'd never told me about it. "Your father was very specific about the timing," he explained as I signed the papers. "He said you'd know when the moment was right." By Thursday morning, Emily Hartman was officially the sole owner of Greenwood Books and 3 adjacent properties in the historic district. By Thursday afternoon, I was sitting across from Margaret Sullivan, director of the Heritage Brookville Foundation. Margaret was exactly what I'd hoped for, mid-60s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of passionate intensity that comes from spending a lifetime fighting losing battles against developers. Her office walls were covered with photographs of buildings that no longer existed, casualties of what she called progress without conscience. "Greenwood Books," she said, studying the ownership documents I'd brought. "I've been trying to get that building landmark status for 15 years. The previous owner always refused to cooperate." "The previous owner was protecting his privacy," I said carefully. "The current owner has different priorities." Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. "What kind of priorities?" "The kind that involves stopping Caro Holdings from turning the historic district into a strip mall." For the next 2 hours, we planned what Margaret called a campaign of beautiful destruction. The Heritage Foundation had been documenting threats to Brookville's historic character for decades. They had architectural surveys, historical research, and most importantly, a network of preservation activists who'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. "The key is timing," Margaret explained. "We need to create momentum before they can get their zoning approvals. Once the city council starts the process, it becomes much harder to stop." By Friday morning, I was ready to launch the first phase of operation. I called Michael Torres at the Gazette and arranged to meet him at Greenwood Books at 2 p.m. Then I called every contact I'd built over 10 years in PR. Reporters, bloggers, social media influencers. Anyone who owed me a favor or believed in a good story. The Save Greenwood campaign went live at exactly 2:17 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Michael's article ran with the headline, "Mystery Owner Steps Forward to Save City's Oldest Bookstore." The story had everything: family legacy, corporate greed, a David and Goliath struggle for the soul of the community. But the real magic happened online. Within hours, Save Greenwood was trending locally. People were sharing memories of the bookstore, posting photos of their favorite corners, organizing impromptu visits. A local Instagram influencer with 50,000 followers posted a video tour of the store that got 20,000 views in the first 2 hours. By 6 p.m., there was a line outside Greenwood Books. People weren't just buying books, they were making statements. They were claiming ownership of their community's narrative. I watched from across the street as Walter handled the crowds with the dignity of a man who'd waited his entire career for this moment. Every purchase was a vote. Every customer a soldier in our war against erasure. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Saw the news. Interesting timing. We should talk. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. Let her scramble. Saturday morning brought even better news. Margaret called at 8 a.m., her voice crackling with excitement. The mayor's office is fielding calls from preservation groups as far away as San Francisco. Someone posted your story on a National Heritage Forum, and it's spreading like wildfire. What about Caro Holdings? Radio silence, but I have a contact at the planning department who says they've postponed their zoning application indefinitely. They're regrouping. By Monday, the campaign had taken on a life of its own. Local news stations were running features on the historic district. The city council announced they were reviewing all pending development applications in the area. 3 other historic properties that had been facing demolition suddenly found themselves protected by a wave of public attention. But it was the email I received Monday evening that told me Phase 1 was complete. Emily, we need to meet. This campaign of yours is damaging important municipal relationships. There are bigger issues at stake than one old bookstore. Let's discuss this like adults. R. I stared at the message for a long moment, savoring the barely concealed panic in Rachel's professional tone. She was feeling the pressure. Good. She was about to feel a lot more. I typed back, happy to meet. How about Thursday at 2 p.m. at Greenwood Books? I'll be giving a public statement about the next phase of the campaign. You're welcome to attend. Her response came within minutes. That's not what I meant, and you know it. I turned off my phone and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside my window, the lights of downtown Brookville twinkled like stars. Somewhere out there, Rachel was learning what it felt like to have the ground shift beneath her feet. She had no idea how far it was going to fall. Rachel's press conference was scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m. at the Brookville Municipal Center. I learned about it through Margaret, who'd heard from her contact at the mayor's office. The official topic was responsible development and community partnership, but everyone knew it was Rachel's attempt to regain control of the narrative. I arrived an hour early and positioned myself in the back of the room with a small handheld camera I'd borrowed from Michael Torres. The press conference was being live-streamed, but I wanted my own recording, just in case. The room filled with reporters, city officials, and what appeared to be several Caro Holdings executives. Rachel entered at precisely 10 a.m., looking every inch the polished professional. She wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And she moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years manipulating public opinion. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, I want to address the recent misinformation campaign that's been targeting legitimate business interests in our community. While I appreciate the sentimental attachment some people have to older buildings, we cannot allow nostalgia to prevent Brookville from reaching its full potential. She clicked to a PowerPoint presentation showing architectural renderings of gleaming condos and retail spaces. The Caro Holdings development proposal represents a $20 million investment in our downtown core. This project will create hundreds of jobs, increase property values, and bring modern amenities to an area that frankly needs revitalization. A reporter from the local NBC affiliate raised her hand. Ms. Green, what about the concerns raised by the Heritage Foundation regarding the historic value of these buildings? Rachel's smile was perfectly calibrated. I respect the Heritage Foundation's passion, but passion doesn't pay for infrastructure repairs or create economic opportunities for working families. The buildings in question, including Greenwood Books, are structurally outdated and economically inefficient. We're not destroying history, we're building the future. She clicked to another slide showing foot traffic studies and sales data. The harsh reality is that these businesses are failing. Greenwood Books has been losing money for years. The kindest thing we can do is help these property owners transition to more profitable uses. That's when I saw him, Marcus Caro, sitting in the front row, nodding approvingly at Rachel's presentation. But more importantly, he was holding his phone, recording everything, and he was smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. After the official presentation, Rachel announced she'd be taking questions from the media. I watched her field softballs about job creation and economic development. Her answers polished and rehearsed. But then Michael Torres raised his hand. Ms. Green, can you comment on reports that you were involved in the questionable termination of Emily Hartman from Stratus & Co. just days before launching this campaign against her family's property? Rachel's composure cracked for just a moment. I think we should focus on the issues that matter to the community, not workplace gossip. But isn't it true that— Thank you, everyone. Rachel cut him off. I think we've covered the important points. As the crowd began to disperse, I followed Rachel and Caro into the hallway. They thought they were alone, but I stayed close enough to hear their conversation while keeping my phone's recording app active. That went well, Caro was saying. But we need to deal with the Hartman woman more directly. She's becoming a problem. I'm working on it, Rachel replied. Emily's always been emotional. She'll make a mistake, and when she does, we'll be ready. What about the other properties? The coffee shop? The gallery? Rachel's laugh was sharp and cold. Marcus, you're thinking too small. Once we get Greenwood Books, everything else falls like dominoes. The whole historic district is just sentimental garbage anyway. Ancient buildings full of dusty books and overpriced coffee, who needs it? We're going to clean out all that old junk, including the people who cling to it. And the city council. Already handled. 3 of the 5 members are on board. The mayor's being difficult, but he'll come around once he sees the tax revenue projections. They walked toward the parking garage, still talking. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding with excitement and disgust. Rachel was revealing everything: the corruption, the contempt, the complete disregard for the community she claimed to serve. The best part, she continued, is watching Emily scramble around with her little Save Greenwood campaign. She thinks she's so clever, but she has no idea how real power works. By the time we're done, she'll be lucky to get a job managing a food truck. Caro laughed. You really don't like her, do you? I spent 10 years watching her get credit for my ideas. Marcus, 10 years of playing second fiddle to someone who never understood that nice girls finish last, but not anymore. They reached Caro's BMW, and I ducked behind a concrete pillar as they got in. My phone had captured every word. That evening, I sat in my apartment, editing the audio file with shaking hands. Rachel's voice was clear, her contempt unmistakable. But I needed to be strategic about how I used this weapon. I called Margaret Sullivan. I need to schedule a press conference for Monday morning. And Margaret? This time, we're going to end this. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for what Margaret called a public execution. The press conference was scheduled for 11 a.m. at Greenwood Books, and by 10:30, the street was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. I stood behind the makeshift podium Walter had set up on the sidewalk, watching the crowd gather. Margaret was beside me, along with representatives from 3 other preservation groups who'd driven in from neighboring cities. Michael Torres had positioned himself near the front with his camera crew. At exactly 11 a.m., I stepped up to the microphone. Good morning. My name is Emily Hartman, and I am the owner of Greenwood Books and several other properties in Brookville's historic district. I'm here today to share some important information about the development proposal that threatens our community. I paused, scanning the crowd. Rachel wasn't there, not surprising, since she had no idea what was coming. Over the past week, we've heard a lot of talk about responsible development and community partnership. We've been told that our historic buildings are obsolete, that our businesses are failing, and that progress requires us to abandon the past. Today, I want you to hear the truth about what's really being planned for our neighborhood. I clicked to my first slide, architectural plans showing the full scope of Caro Holdings' development. Not just Greenwood Books, but the entire block, the coffee shop, the gallery, the vintage clothing store, even the small apartments above the retail spaces. This isn't about one bookstore, I continued. This is about the systematic destruction of everything that makes Brookville unique. 47 businesses and 68 residential units, all scheduled for demolition to make way for luxury condos that working families will never be able to afford. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people were recording with their phones. But more disturbing than the scope of this project is the deception behind it. The public has been told that this development represents a partnership between business and community. What they haven't been told is how that partnership was formed. I click to the next slide, a timeline showing Rachel's employment history, her incorporation of Caro Holdings, and her strategic positioning at Stratus & Co. Rachel Green, the woman who's been presenting herself as a community advocate, has been planning this development for months. While employed at Stratus & Co., she gained access to confidential client information about property values, zoning restrictions, and development opportunities. She used that information to target specific properties for acquisition, including Greenwood Books. The crowd was getting restless now, journalists scribbling notes and camera operators adjusting their angles. Ms. Green has claimed that the businesses in this district are failing, that the buildings are worthless, that the community would benefit from their removal. I want you to hear what she really thinks about this neighborhood and the people who live here. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the portable speaker Walter had set up. This recording was made last Thursday, immediately after Ms. Green's press conference at the Municipal Center. Rachel's voice filled the street, crystal clear and unmistakably contemptuous. The whole historic district is just sentimental garbage anyway. Ancient buildings full of dusty books and overpriced coffee. Who needs it? We're going to clean out all that old junk, including the people who cling to it. The crowd erupted. Someone shouted, "Shame!" and others took up the cry. I waited for the noise to die down before continuing. But it gets worse. Ms. Green also revealed the extent of political corruption involved in this project. I played the second clip. Already handled. 3 of the 5 members are on board. The mayor's being difficult, but he'll come around once he sees the tax revenue projections. This time, the crowd's reaction was angrier. These weren't just preservationists anymore, they were voters who'd just learned their representatives had been bought. Finally, I want you to understand the personal motivation behind this deception. The third clip was the most damaging. I spent 10 years watching her get credit for my ideas. Marcus. 10 years of playing second fiddle to someone who never understood that nice girls finish last. But not anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Michael Torres raised his hand. Ms. Hartman, do you have evidence that Ms. Green used confidential information from Stratus & Co. to benefit Caro Holdings? I smiled. I've filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding potential violations of corporate confidentiality laws and anti-corruption statutes. The evidence has been turned over to the appropriate authorities. Another reporter called out, "What about the city council members she mentioned?" The recording has been shared with the State Ethics Commission. I'm confident they'll conduct a thorough investigation. As the questions continued, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd. Rachel had arrived, her face pale as she watched her career implode in real time. Our eyes met across the crowd, and for a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. I leaned into the microphone for my final statement. Greenwood Books will remain open as it has for 146 years. Our community is not for sale. The crowd erupted in applause. Rachel turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched in defeat. The war wasn't over yet, but the battle was mine. The aftermath moved with the swift brutality of a summer storm. By Tuesday morning, Rachel's resignation from Stratus & Co. was announced in a terse 2-sentence press release. By Wednesday, the State Ethics Commission had launched formal investigations into 3 city council members. By Thursday, Caro Holdings had withdrawn their development application and issued a statement about pursuing opportunities in other markets. I should have felt satisfied. The plan had worked flawlessly. Rachel was destroyed. The historic district was safe, and justice had been served. But as I sat in my apartment Friday evening, watching the local news coverage of what reporters were calling the Brookville corruption scandal, I felt something unexpected, emptiness. 10 years of friendship, obliterated in a single week. A woman's career ended not by her own choices, but by my carefully orchestrated revenge. I'd won everything I'd set out to win. But victory tasted like ash in my mouth. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it. Rachel. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Saturday morning, I walked to Greenwood Books for the grand reopening celebration. The entire block had been closed to traffic, and the street was filled with families, local musicians, and vendors selling everything from handmade jewelry to artisanal coffee. The mayor, who'd survived the ethics investigation with a formal censure, was scheduled to speak at 2 p.m. Walter greeted me at the door wearing a bow tie and a smile that could have powered the entire district. Miss Hartman, you've given this old store a second life. Your father would be so proud. Inside, the bookstore was transformed. Margaret's preservation team had worked with local artists to create displays highlighting the building's history. The children's section buzzed with young families discovering new favorites. The poetry corner was packed with teenagers sharing verses and dreams. But it was the back office that truly moved me. Walter had created a small memorial to my father, photos of him through the years, always in the same corner armchair, always with a book and a gentle smile. A brass plaque read, Robert Hartman, 1952-2020, Guardian of Stories. At 2 p.m., I stood before the microphone again, but this time the crowd was celebratory rather than angry. Children played between the folding chairs while their parents listened to speeches about community values and historic preservation. 6 months ago, I began. I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it meant climbing corporate ladders, winning accounts, and earning the approval of people who didn't really know me. Today, I understand that real success is about protecting the things that matter. It's about being a guardian of what makes us human. I paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, some familiar, some new, all connected by their investment in this small corner of the world. Greenwood Books doesn't just sell stories, it preserves them, it creates them. It reminds us that in a world of constant change, some things are worth keeping exactly as they are. The celebration continued until sunset, with readings, musical performances, and the kind of spontaneous community joy that you can't manufacture or buy. As the last customers filtered out and Walter locked the door, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. I'd set out to destroy Rachel Green, and I'd succeeded completely. But in saving Greenwood Books, I'd discovered something more valuable than revenge. Purpose. The bookstore would continue to serve the community for another generation, and the historic district would remain intact for the children who'd played in the street today. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's creation. It's building something so beautiful and necessary that your enemy's attempts to tear it down only make it stronger. As I walked home through the evening light, past the windows of the shops and apartments I'd helped protect, I realized that my father had been right all along. We weren't just property owners or business operators. We were guardians of something irreplaceable. The stories that make us who we are. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what stories are worth protecting in your own community. Please subscribe to hear more tales of justice, redemption, and the power of ordinary people to change the world. Share your thoughts below. I read every comment.